Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, everyone. We'll just wait for a minute before we get started to let everyone log in and get over any of the last minute network issues. Thank you for joining us today. All right, I believe we have most of the attendees who are going to be able to make it. Once again, I'd like to greet you. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, wherever in the world you are. We truly have a global audience with us today. I'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining our webinar. My name is Addie, and I'm the Business Development Manager at databrackets. I will be your host for today's event. I'm joined by our director, Srini Kolathur, and our guest, Mr. Gert from Three-Headed Giant. An ISO 27001 certification has become a basic requirement for a growing number of B2B contracts, and it is being mandated in different industries and different countries. As a standard, ISO is popular globally because organizations benefit from the high level of security and good cyber hygiene. In order to keep up with the dynamic nature of cyber attacks and growing level of data exchange between organizations, ISO has launched a critical update in October 2022. We will be focusing on this update and guiding you to get or stay certified. A little bit about databrackets. We have been at the forefront of supporting businesses to comply with HIPAA, SOC 2, ISO 27001, CMMC, and other compliance certifications for over a decade. We have various accreditations, and for ISO certification, we are accredited by IAS to certify ISO 27001 compliant organizations. Our staff consists of several certified ISO lead auditors who have contributed to the information which we will be sharing today. We are delighted to bring you this webinar in collaboration with Three-Headed Giant, our preferred implementation and consulting partner. Next slide, please. During this webinar, there are a basic set of housekeeping rules which we need to keep in mind. The webinar will be approximately an hour long, and it will include a Q&A session at the end. However, if we exceed this limit, you can log off and view the recording that will be shared with all participants. All lines will be muted during the presentation. I encourage you to submit your questions as they come up. You can simply type in your question in the chat panel on the right side of your screen. For those who have already submitted your questions, thank you. We have included them in the prepared presentation. The presentation deck is available in the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel for you to download. If you have any questions which come up after the webinar, you can email us or connect with an expert through our website. You can also stay connected with us on social media. Next slide, please. I'd like to begin with our disclaimer. This webinar has been provided for educational and informational purposes only and is not intended and should not be construed to constitute legal advice. Please consult your attorneys in connection with any fact-specific situation under federal law and the applicable state or local laws that may impose additional obligations on you and your company. Next slide, please. I have the privilege of introducing our director, Srini Kolathur. Srini is a results-driven security and compliance professional with over 20 years of experience in leading and managing global IT security, compliance, support, and risk management in Fortune 100 companies. Some of his key areas of focus are HIPAA, PCI, Sarbanes-Oxley, ISO 27000 series, NIST Cybersecurity Framework, CMMC, among others. He is active in several community groups, including Rotary International and TIE. I could go on and on about Srini's experience and achievements, but will not do justice. Therefore, I hand it over to Srini, who can speak better about his experience the services offered at databrackets, and introduce our partner, three-headed giant, and our special guest for today, Mr. Gert.
Thank you, Aditi. Thanks for the wonderful introduction. I'm not going to talk more about myself, and let's jump right into our topic. Before we get started, as Aditi mentioned, databrackets, we are primarily an assessment shop. What we do is we have a platform where if you want to do your own assessment, we offer that option. And also the most popular option is like the consulting, where people want to get certain things assessed, implemented, and whatnot. So we could do all of these things using our consulting services. And then of course the managed security is more about your SIM, SOC, another solution that you may want to implement across your environment. So that is something actually we could do as well. So here are some of our assessments. Like as you all know, HIPAA high tech is mandated for a lot of the healthcare companies in the US. The OSHA is also the same way, the occupation safety. A lot of the other assessment that are listed here, including the NIST frameworks and PCI, GDPR, and all, they have a lot of overlaps, but still, we could go based on the controls that are defined in some of these standard frameworks, and then be able to individually do the assessment and provide you with specific recommendation in terms of what exactly you need to be doing in order to comply with that. So a lot of them are just assessment, and there are a few things that has the certification part attached with it. Of course, ISO is one of them. So ISO 27001 is probably the most popular security standard now that exists. And then in the United States, a lot of customers are also opting for SOC 2. It's not technically a certification, they call it SOC 2 examination because it is the auditor's opinion is what is documented in your SOC 2 reports. And the most popular service, one of the most popular services that we have is also the VAPT. Some people call it pen testing, some people call it vulnerability assessment and stuff. So that is also one of our most popular. So we could do whether you have a cloud-based environment or you have on-prem or you have hybrid environment, we would be able to pretty much do all type of vulnerability assessment and pen testing of your environment. So that's at a very high level in terms of what you do primarily. And then I think Aditi already talked about it. So we are just for the interest of today's audience, we are accredited by IAF, IAF and IAS actually, so together. IAS uses IAF published guidelines for accrediting us. So we are accredited by IAS to do the ISO 27001 certification. And of course, we have some of other ISO certification as well. That's probably not directly relevant to what we are going to be talking today. So let's jump right into our topic for today's webinar, which is what are some of the key changes in ISO 27001 that was very recently published in October, right? So so far, most of the certifying bodies, they were using 2013 version of ISO 27000 manual to certify you. So usually that certification goes for about 3-year period, and then again you will get recertified, and that's how you maintain that ISO 27001 certification. So now going forward, we are required to follow ISO 27001 2022 version. So what does that really mean? We have more detailed slides in terms of what all the major changes between 2013 and 2022. So there are of course some major changes, but it's not totally different. There are, I would say, about 70 to 80% of the information that are in 2013 has been carried over to 2022. This is again, the approximate number. But then there are some new controls and new processes and things that are introduced as part of 2022 version, which we will review very quickly, right? So, so what does it really mean for you in terms of these revisions and the certification, right? So we are still allowed to certify you as an organization. Let's say you are trying to get certified for ISO 27001 today. So we can still certify you based on the 2013 version. So you don't need to use the 2022 version that is released. And now our accreditation agency, they are going through a transition assessment. That's what they call it. Like whenever revision has been announced, so they will kind of standardize some of this process and then provide us more guidance. That's what we would use for 2022. So essentially, if you come to us today and if you want to get certified in ISO 27001 2022 standard, that is not available yet, right? So we will still use the 2013 version to do the certification. Of course, you could do the transition as published by the ISO guidelines for us. So we can still use the 2013 version technically until 2025, October 21, 2025, to do the transition. So we can continue. After that, it's going to be discontinued. So that means we can use only 2022 version from October 21, 2025 onwards. Again, I know technically it might get a little bit complicated for your particular scenario. As Aditi mentioned, feel free to email us if you have any question in terms of your particular scenario. Okay, so this kind of gives you the high-level picture in terms of of what has changed in the 2013 versus 2022. As you could see, the number of classes, that hasn't changed. That still remains the same. 11 classes, main classes in 2013, and 11 in 2022. So you all know security is a big deal. Now the things change and the threat landscape changes, and the controls obviously need to change. So ISO, they've reduced the number of controls from 114 to 93. This is the Annex A reference. Actually, we have two reference manuals, 27001 and 27002. 27002 is the one that has all the annex controls, essentially some of the control that we need to use to audit you against all the controls that you have in place. So that has, the number of controls have reduced, but that doesn't mean the work has reduced, or like the effort that is going to require to implement some of these controls have changed, right? So that, in fact, in my opinion, it's going to be a little bit more. We have another slide that talks about the controls that have changed. We will discuss that in detail. And then the number of sections within Annex A, like they kind of consolidated that into 4 from 14. And so that is at a very high level, right? So what is that like? You need to know, maybe diving deep into this one. So they've introduced 11 new controls. Going back to this earlier slide, right? The 93 that we are talking about here. So what they've done is they have introduced 11 new controls. I have that listed in the next slide. And then they also, what they did is they merged certain controls, because some of them, if you see, there is some kind of redundancy in terms of the control that we would be testing. For example, the log monitoring of your systems, and then also your networking device and stuff. Some of these things might be redundant. So what they've done is they merged these controls, and then they also split, actually just only one control, and then they've just renamed a few controls, and then there are this 35 control that remains unchanged. Although, as I said, like about 70 to 80% of them kind of remains the same. That means the main focus is going to be for you is this 11 new controls that they have introduced, right? So as you could see here, these are like really heavy topics: threat intelligence, And then the security for cloud services that you are you are implementing, especially with the AWS as your shared responsibility model, and then your business continuity and the readiness of your disaster recovery systems, and then your physical security monitoring. All of these things that are listed here, those are like, I think, going to be the new control that you are implementation partner and also your certifying audit company is going to be looking at it. So as you could see here, data masking, you all know the issues with data masking. If you are maintaining multiple environment within your IT, you make a copy of your production into development and stage without really masking the production data, right? So that is actually a kind of a mandatory requirement now. So if you have multiple environment of the production, then as auditor, we want to see you have the data masking control in place, right? And then DLP, again, is a big thing, data leakage prevention. I think Gert has a slide where he's probably going to be talking in detail about some of these things as well. And then secure coding. They didn't have any specific requirements on secure coding earlier, so they have brought in the requirements on secure coding. Just in the interest of time, if you, I'm not going to be individually going over each one of these new security controls. However, what you could do though is, you could just go to ISO.org and purchase this ISO 27001 manual and 27002, both of them, right? That has got more detailed description of what is the control, or what is the expectation, and what is that they want to see as part of the implementation and certification and stuff. So that kind of, at a high level covers, as Aditi mentioned, like we are going to be you have this slide deck available in the handout section of your GoToWebinar panel. You can download that and make some notes if you would like, and refer it for your future purposes. And now it's my time to introduce Gert Anthony's. I know like I'm going to butcher his last name. Sorry about that, Gert. And we are very, very, happy to have you on this webinar session. And so as you could see, Gert comes with a lot of good credentials, especially in this security, cybersecurity, privacy area. And so he's actually, just before this webinar, we were just talking about the DPO certification and things that Gert has done. So we are very happy to introduce Gert at this time. And Gert.
Yes, thank you, Srini, for the introduction and for the opportunity to take some time to speak to you today. So as you can see, my name is Geert Antunis. I'm one of the senior consultants for Three-Headed Giant. I'm not gonna spend too much on this slide. Just know that I've spent more than 20 years in IT, and the last 10 years I've mainly occupied myself moving on from service management really to security stuff, privacy stuff, because I saw that there was a huge overlap between the two areas. But I will expand a little bit on that in the next couple of slides. So if you can move on, Srini, then people have seen my face enough now. So like I said, for people who are not that totally familiar, we are mainly talking about the differences between the old version of 27001 and the new version. But just to make it clear, databrackets is what we call a certification body. So what they do is they do an independent audit of what you have done to achieve compliance. They will look at how you implemented the norm, how you implemented the standard, and all of the controls that are listed in the standards. And if they think that you meet the requirements, they will issue the certification. We, on the other hand, we are a party that helps companies in implementing ISO 27001. And although we are doing this session today together, we are in fact independently of each other, and we cannot, it is against the rules that we should cooperate in some way to do the implementation, for example. It's two separate entities, but like Srini said, we need each other And companies need both parties to achieve that certification. And of course, we have from previous implementations and certifications, we have established a good relation. So that is the reason why today we are taking the opportunity to talk to you about ISO 27001 together. Next slide, please. First of all, I'm gonna talk about where we come from, just because we have a rather strange name, and just gonna quickly explain it. It comes really from a quote from Mark Twain. If I have seen further, it's because I've been standing on the shoulder of giants. Now, the giant in our case got 3 heads. And you might wonder where that comes from. Well, as you perhaps saw from my CV, I come from a background of service management. So I have my roots in the ITIL framework, and the ITIL framework from first version, really, they started talking about 3 important elements in information technology. That's people, process, and products. So those are our 3 heads. Now they have to work in unison. They have to balance each other out for the giant to remain on its feet. So that is the reason why we chose that name. And some might wonder how the link is made between service management and security and privacy. But if you look, for example, at ISO 27001, there's a lot of stuff that we from our ITIL background were very, very familiar with. If you look at things like asset management, incident management, continuity management, all of that stuff, there are actually ITIL processes for them. So we have a good knowledge of best practices in those areas, and that is the reason why we thought it would be a good match for us to delve into the information security and privacy world as well. Next slide, please. So, like I said, these people, process, technology, they're very important for us. Yes, really, you can hit the bar a couple of times. The slide is animated, but you see that coming together in our portfolio as well, because we have in each of our areas where we specialize in, we have created those 3 pillars: people, process, and product. We have products in place to help companies achieve their goals. We know a lot about process implementation, so we help implement processes, and of course we take a look at the people, and that can be providing the people themselves, like data protection officer as a service, or it can also be that we go through, help you achieve organizational change. So organizational behavioral change management is also something that we have in our portfolio. Zooming in a little bit, next slide, please. On what that actually means in terms of privacy and security. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff that we can do by just offering warm bodies, as it's called. We can do assessments, audits in all GDPR, ISO, but we can also help you in implement the ISO norm. So that's something that we can, like I said, help in terms of resources, human resources that we provide, or we can also have a look, review documentation. It all depends on the level of cooperation that our customers want. Do they want to do as much work themselves as possible? Then it's more of a guidance. If they really want to get us to do most of the implementation, that is possible as well. So we're not only looking at the ISO 27001, which is the norm or the standard you can certify against. Srini has talked about the 27002. That's guidance. You cannot certify against that norm, but it provides a lot of useful information if you want to implement the 27001. And of course, we have a product. You heard me say that people is a large part, or is an integral part of what we feel that is important. And that is the reason why we also pay a lot of attention to awareness. And that is the reason why we have created an awareness tool, because we really want to focus on what I always call the ABC of information security. So you have to make people aware of certain stuff in order to change their behavior. And by changing that, you can really achieve a security culture. So that's the ABC for you. Next slide, please. Because we are going to talk about ISO 27001, of course. And if you look at the management norms, standards inside the ISO world, you can always see the Deming cycle coming back. Alexander Deming, a mathematician who really described that in order to achieve something, you always have to go to a cycle. It's like a huge piece of rock that you're trying to roll up the hill, and you have to make sure that you have some kind of thing in place that you can put in between the rock and the soil, so it doesn't roll back when you're doing this kind of stuff. And that's really what he's on about. You need to make a plan about what you're going to do, then actually do it, of course, and then you check whether you have arrived, and based on your checks, you will probably find some gaps or some things that you could do better, and then you start acting upon those. And that translates inside the ISO norm as well. So the way we usually go about things is, of course, start with the plan phase, where we assemble the team. And the team, it can depend. Like I said, some companies want to do as much as possible themselves. Other companies, they tend to lean for the most part on our consultants to do the implementation. What is very important in this is that we need to have the management buy-in. So in the team, somebody from C-level, preferably, should be a main sponsor or supporter of what we are trying to do, because the management commitment, and that's to draw another analogy with ITIL, that's something that is important. We first always do a gap analysis as well, so because nobody starts from a clean slate. You all have some kind of procedures or processes in place, and some of them might well be applicable to reach the standard. So we are going to look at that. We're going to look at the documentation that you perhaps have to see where there are the gaps, see the level of maturity of those documents, where they are lacking in information or where they are already sufficient. And we also start working on the all-important risk register. So that is the place where you examine all the risks that are in scope for your organization. It's usually some workshops that are being held in the beginning, where a basic skeleton of that risk register is put together, and then as you go along, you will see that this risk register gets filled, risks get treated in some way or another, and that's the way that you move forward. Also, an important factor are the interested parties, as they are called inside ISO, and I think that's a very good term, because usually people talk about stakeholders, but interested parties is a very good term, because it's broader than just the stakeholders. You also look at what are our competitors doing, for example, what is government or what is law requiring us to do. So it's really good to look at your company from a very broad perspective, and that helps you in identifying the correct risks and the gaps that exist. Then we enter into the do phase, where we start to look at, start to create policies if they don't exist, look at what controls we can put in place in order to achieve the level of compliance that we want to achieve. And at the end, first, before we go into the check phase, we do an internal audit. So we ourselves, you can do it yourself. If you have opted for to create an internal audit department for that, you go check for yourself. Do you think we did a good job? Do we have we covered all of the controls? Have we followed the clauses? Is our documentation complete, up to standard? And that is something that is checked. And then when you have that level of confidence, then it's usually the time to contact or to bring in the certification body to start the certification audit. A certification audit always takes 2 stages. First, you have the stage 1 audit, which looks really more at the documents. Are they present, and are they up to par? And then the actual audit, phase 2 audit, is walking around, questionnaires, interviews, willing to try and test if what you said you were going to do is actually what you're doing. Based on the audit findings, there might be corrective actions that you need to correct in order to put yourself in good standard according to ISO 27001. It can be as well, it can be recommendations as well that you need to take into account, and it's also something because once you get certified, each year you will have a surveillance audit, as it's called, and it's something that the auditor, the certification body, they will look into. Did you follow our advice, or did you do nothing with it? So it's important that you take into account what the auditor has told you as well. Next slide, please. So like Srini has already said, there's 11 new controls inside ISO 27001, and I want to talk a little bit about those controls. They are ranked in more or less a way where they get more difficult to apply. And first of all, it talks about threat intelligence. So it's information relating to threats, and you need to collect that information. You need to analyze it so that information becomes intelligent. It's like the data leads to information, leads to knowledge, leads to wisdom, adagio that they use in ITIL. You need to make sure that your organization, that you understand your threat environment and that you can mitigate those threats. It's working, expanding on the risk register that you're already implied to do. So there's of course tools that can help you achieve this, things like Cisco Umbrella or Azure Sentinel. I also work for a company where they use ServiceNow. For example, ServiceNow in its operations, I'm not paid in any way, by the way, so it's just an independent comment. They have, for example, in their security operations suite, they implement the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So where that's an existing framework, you can look into it. It's more or less open source, where you can see what kind of threat actors are out there and how should you respond to those threat actors. So you can leverage all of that stuff inside your ISO implementation and your ISO controls to make sure that you achieve what is needed in this area. Second one is, it's evident, obvious that everybody is using cloud services in one way or another. So you need to identify what kind of cloud do you need, what are you going to use, and what are the risks that are involved with that. And you have to start looking at, okay, how will we, or how can we protect that cloud environment? And if we get attacked, do we know how to respond? Do we know how to solve issues? So it's really a matter of implementing your security at the lowest possible level here. So stay as close to the data as possible if you are thinking about implementing security measures on the cloud, for example. So things like encryption, access control, isolating networks. For example, a client that I'm working for, they use packet fence to achieve that kind of security controls. The ICT readiness for business continuity, it's always more or less present inside the ISO 27001 norm. They even created a special norm for it. So the 22301 talks especially about business continuity. In terms of 27001, it's about implementing the basics. So make sure you have your business impact analysis. Talk about stuff, define your RTOs and RPOs, so the recovery time objective and the recovery point objective. To what point do you want to be able to restore data to, and or to what time objective do you want to restore it to? Make sure that you have those kind of things present inside your organization. Physical security monitoring. This is also about identifying and protecting your secured or restricted areas with the appropriate surveillance tools. So there's no use at putting a retina scanner at the front door of your company. That will be considered as way too intrusive. But if you want to implement security measures like that for your server room, if you have one present, that's already more acceptable, and that's stuff that you should be looking at doing if you want to meet the requirements from the ISO standpoint. Now, configuration management. I really like the fact that they have started talking about configuration management rather than asset management, because also from our ITIL background, we know that configuration management just goes that step further. An asset is in fact some kind of configuration item. You're just looking at it through what I always call a financial glass. But it's important that you have all these other things as well, all the things that are connected within your network, your services. You need to make sure that they have the required security settings and that those settings cannot be altered. It's also a huge link here with change management. It's not most of the things that are causing problems are not done by malicious acts. They are just done by poorly implemented changes. So you need to make sure that you configure your devices or services, design your services in such a way that it's very hard to change the security baseline by accident. Information deletion, data masking, those two really have a close link with GDPR. That's come into being since the last version. And it's all about making sure that you comply with the legal or regulatory contractual requirements you have for information. This is a huge link with your register of processing activities that you have under GDPR. What kind of processing activities do you have? How long are you, what are your retention periods on that data? So that's stuff you need to look at. And the data masking, of course, making sure that if you have your development or quality assurance environment, stuff like that. I've worked on systems on testing where the whole live production data was available, and I could look up real life people's addresses and stuff like that. There's no need for that to exist anymore. There's tons of solutions that help you mask that data. So that's stuff that you need to consider or you need to put in place if you want to comply by ISO as well. Data leakage prevention, it's also something that relates to GDPR, of course, data breaches, but it's also, this is where, for example, the people factor plays an important role, because people are often your weakest link, where unintentionally, again, they leave stuff in the office on their desk or whatever, and it's not just a technical process. You need to work on awareness training as well. Monitoring activities. Now, this is, of course, look for anomalous behavior and potential information security incidents. Now, a real life example here as well. Company that I work for, they monitor the logins from their users. So when you see a user log in and 45 minutes later they see an attempt from that person somewhere in Sri Lanka or somewhere, then they probably know that something fishy is going on. So they are preventing that person from logging on, and a whole set of security measures is being put into place. So make sure that you have the ability to detect that kind of stuff and react and protect yourselves against that. Web filtering is also something that we know, blacklisting or whitelisting, making sure that people do not access potentially harmful websites from within your company network. And last but not least, we have the secure coding, which existed more or less in the previous version, but they were more like secure coding principles that were a little bit vague. Now it's getting more concrete because they see that a lot of security issues are being caused by malicious code. I don't need to remind you of the Log4j incident that happened last year. Your supply chain attack is becoming increasingly important, so you need to protect yourself against that, and you can do that by security by design, password management, access control, all that kinds of stuff. And you see, if you are talking about this kind of stuff like in what's described in OWASP, then you see the link with a lot of other controls inside ServiceNow. So you know this one is hard to do because there's so many links with other controls that are in place. So last one, if your company is doing software development, so this is one really to take a long, hard look at. Okay, I think that was my section, Srini.
Awesome, thanks. Thanks, Gert. So we kind of formatted this presentation more on the Q&A side based on some of the most popular questions that we received from our customer base. So we thought like maybe we'll address them, and then if you obviously have more questions, we'll be happy to answer them. One of the most important questions that we get from our customer, which we think is very important too, as certifying agencies, identifying the scope for the certification. So obviously, in ISO 27001, they always talk about ISMS. That is the information security and management systems, right? So it is essentially, all the systems and servers where you are collecting data, processing data, transferring or storing, all of them are kind of covered as part of, needs to be covered as part of the scope. Because as we do the certification, there is, so we have a more detailed SOA that we prepare. This is the applicability of the statement. So the statement of applicability is what like we kind of go over each one of those controls that we are going to be doing certification on, and then determine whether that particular is going to be applied in your area or not. And then like we will also capture some of our the details of the controls and stuff. So this is something, this exercise we will do it jointly with the customer, because this is something that goes always with the certification, right? So let's say like if you want to demonstrate that you are in you have this ISO 27001 certification, you will be given a certificate that will be a straightforward document where it will refer the SOA, the statement of applicability. That's where this comes into play, and this could also potentially go to your client as part of the certification. So this is a very important document. We need to be spending a lot of time in this particular exercise to determine what is applicable for our certification and how it is applicable, and all those sort of things are kind of noted here. And then how do you get ISO certified? This is like, I think this chart might look a little bit complicated, but if you really see, there is mainly these three different phases. There is this pre-certification phase where we kind of determine if you are ready for your certification or not, right? So we have certain mandatory document requirements which we will review with you and your implementation partner like Gert's team and stuff, and then like determine whether you are ready for a certification. If you think we are ready, if you think we are ready, then we will go ahead and prepare the proposal and have the contract and everything signed. Then like we will come up with our audit program and whatnots, and then share that with you. Primarily the two things that you need to know is there is two phases of this audit. One is stage 1 and stage 2. Stage 1 essentially, it is also called like kind of document review. So we look at all your policies, procedures, and make sure that, you know, whatever you referred in the statement of applicability is all covered, you know, as part of your, you know, the documentation submission and record submission and whatnot. That usually takes, depending on, usually we are required to do this stage 1 and stage 2 certification. The general allocation of time is also provided very specifically in one of the manuals in ISO, which is ISO 27006. So they very clearly document in terms of how many days we need to be taking to audit an entity based on what all the criteria and things. So essentially, you know, it is based on the number of users using the ISMS system and whatnot. But just to give you an idea, stage 1 usually is about, you know, anywhere from 1 to 3 days for a medium-sized company, but for a larger company, it could change drastically. And stage 2 audit, most of the time it is on-site audit. And IAS has kind of relaxed the requirement of on-site audit due to COVID restrictions. But like starting January 1st, we are required to do on-site audit only, unless we get any specific exemption from our or exemption request from our customer, which we will, you know, run it by IAS before, you know, approving that. Right. And then like once the stage 2 audit, technically it can go on from like say minimum of 4 or 5 days all the way to maybe even a few weeks. And that's where like we will go over each one of your controls. We'll have your subject matter expert walk us through, and we will document a lot of those findings, observations and things, and then provide you with you know, the specific non-conformities that we see as part of our audit, right? And then like you do have a few weeks to fix all the non-conformities that are identified. Some of them could be as simple as updating your policy document, which has not been updated with your new process, or it could be, you know, implementing even a new technology solution and whatnot. So it all depends on what is that we identify as part of our stage 2 audit. And then like at the end of the audit, then the audit report is provided to our certification committee. And the certification committee is the one that kind of determines whether we could approve the certificate or whatnot. And then we go through the site, and then we grant the initial certification, right? And then after year 1, that is also referred in our certificate, unless you maintain the surveillance audits, your certificate is not valid. So year 1, we come back again and then do the surveillance audit. Surveillance audit generally, just to give you a ballpark, it's anywhere from 30 to 40% of our initial effort that we spend on the initial certification, right? So, so obviously the number of days spent with your team is going to be much less. And we essentially start off based on the surveillance audit requirements per our ISO guidelines, and we start off with our non-conformities that are identified in our earlier audit, and then like we go through your internal audit reports, we look at your management reviews, and that's the process we use to go through this one. And then it's the same for year 2 and year 2 as well, right? So we go through the same process for year 2, and then the last one is you know, again in year, at the end of year 3, like we need to do a complete audit, right? The recertification audit, and that will be pretty much following the same process of stage 1, stage 2, and then you know, finalizing everything. So that's the process generally we use for, you know, our certification and the surveillance and things. So once you're certified, technically you are good for 3 years as long as you continue to do your surveillance audit and stuff. And then after the end of the 3rd year, like you will go ahead with your full audit, right? And then for some of you who are on this call, I think Gert already kind of covered on you know, in terms of like what are the different things that he will be doing as part of the implementation. If we had to group all the different things that we would be doing certification audit on, so this is how we would group it, right? So these are the 5 key focus areas that we would be looking at. Let's start from the technical safeguard. I think Gert already went through all the different requirements and the change and the controls that he is going to be implementing and whatnot. And then we will be looking at your risk register and looking at your internal assessments and whatnots and the internal audits, and then your policies and procedure. That's a majority of our audit time. That's where our majority of our audit time is spent. So we'll be looking at your policies, procedures, and picking some samples, and then requesting you to walk through that these controls are implemented according to your policies and procedures, and of course your supplier contracts and your customer contracts and stuff, making sure that all the requirements from the security perspectives are all being met and things. And then of course training is a big part of ISO as well. So we will be looking at the training content, the training materials and whatnot, to make sure that your organization is complying with all the requirements and whatnot. Again, we have a different slide in terms of what are the different areas, high level we will be looking at and things. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to skip it. You always have this slide for your reference if you want to look at it. And these are the main controls that are classes, I think they call it. So these are the main classes that are that we will be looking at. The main thing that actually you all need to be knowing also from your implementation and certification perspective, ISO requires your leadership to be involved in the security management program. And so what essentially it means, security is being discussed in your board meetings, and security, you have designated security roles and responsibilities defined, and you have designated security officer, and you have some ongoing meetings with respect to the threats, with respect to the risks that you've identified, with respect to how you are remediating those risks and stuff. Those are some of the things that ISO requires you to implement as part of the ISO 27001. Right. So there are some of these things we don't want to get into the details, but as I mentioned earlier, most of these things are available in the ISO 27001 and 27002 manual that you can purchase, right? And also as part of making this process much simpler, we have published ISO 27001 guide that answers a lot of or at least most frequently asked questions. So this is a hyperlink. Actually, if you have the PDF, you can download and click on it. It will directly take you to the resources page on our website, where you will be able to refer to all our frequently asked questions and whatnots. Just to give you an example in terms of Gert walked us through the implementation process, and I just wanted to quickly walk you through how a certification or an audit of a particular control would happen, right? So the data leakage prevention, which is actually very specifically called out in the new 2022 one. So what we would be doing is essentially we will be translating what is the technology that needs to be implemented. These all again needs to be mapped with your scope, right? What are the systems you're talking about, whether you're talking about email systems that are going to be in scope, whether you're talking about cloud-based systems, or whether you're talking about other FTP servers and whatnot. So we are going to be looking at all the all the systems that are going to be in scope for this particular control, and see what is your first policies and procedures, right? As part of your data leakage prevention. And if your policy says that you are going to be having this DLP implemented across the board, then we are going to be making sure that these things are implemented across the board. And then also talk about some of this the training requirements and things for your staff to be able to understand what exactly is involved in terms of maintaining and monitoring some of those controls and stuff. From a certification perspective, we are going to be primarily looking at whether these meets the control definition and the requirements per the manual, and if it is going to be meeting the requirements, then we are going to be passing that particular control, right? If the control is not implemented properly, and if it is not like if it requires additional enhancements and stuff, then we are going to be calling that on out as non-conformity, and then we are going to be identifying the risk that is involved in not having this control properly implemented, calling out specifically what could be the repercussions and whatnot, and that's the way like we will go about identify going over the control, certifying that particular control is in place, and then also be able to quantify some of the risks and other things that are going to be introduced as part of not having that particular control in place. Yeah, so these are some of the examples of policies and procedures that we would see. It doesn't need to be called specifically bring your own device policy. It could be part of your information security policy. That could be a section where you talk about this policy. What do you do with the some companies might say, hey, we don't allow BYOD totally, right? Some companies might say, okay, so we allow that upon approval by our IT team. Some companies might say, okay, so we allow BYOD, and then they need to implement certain software and things on their device, then we allow BYOD, right? Those are like some of the things we will be looking at. These are like some of the different areas that we would be looking at, like whether you have done your BIA, business impact analysis, identified all the key components for your business continuity and whatnot. So these are like some of the policies. I don't think like we will have enough time to go over each one of these things, but these are like some of the examples. Again, this is not like this doesn't include like everything that we'll be looking at, but some of the key things that we'll be looking at. And yeah, so at the end of the day, once our assessment is done, like we will be providing you with detailed observations, the findings, and remediation reports and whatnots if required, any non-conformities and stuff. And then along with that, it will also include the SOA and the profiling that we have done. And if you have gone through the whole process, and if our certification committee decides that like you're good to go, then like we will be issuing you the digital certificate. And then like also all of these things, like we we basically use our own portal, the one that I was earlier discussing, DIY platform, right? So we pretty much use our own platform to do the assessments and things. During this process, like you will obviously have access to the same information that we are using to do the determination of your control effectiveness and stuff. So you will definitely be able to access and upload the required documents and whatnot. And then in terms of the certification, actually, sorry, I'm covering more on the certification side of things, and for implementation, it is a whole different engagement model. Maybe once this is done, Gert, if you want, you can talk about the implementation model that you guys would use. Essentially, we have to work with your point of contact security officer, and we need to be knowing your point of contacts for all the different areas that we will be doing assessment on, and also the management team who is going to be looking at our final audit report and signing off and things. So generally, like it's about like 4 to 8 hours of time. This is more on the implementation side of things, but for certification, based on what I mentioned, like stage 1 and stage 2, we will be engaging your team. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think like we kind of briefly talked about it. How much time it takes for readiness and how much time it takes for certification audit and things. Gert, do you want to add anything to this slide?
Yeah, well, it all depends, of course, like I said in the beginning, how much time are you able or willing to spend on it yourselves? One thing I always reiterate is the fact that it's not about producing the documents and the policies and thinking that you are ready. You always have to make sure that this thing, this ISMS as it's called, you have to prove that it has been running for a certain amount of time. So we always recommend to have at least 3 months where your ISMS is functioning as you described it to function, so that you are able to demonstrate to the auditor that it is indeed working the way that you described it would work.
Yeah, very good point, Gert. Yeah. And then what are the benefits of ISO 27001? I think, like, you all understand that. That's why you're on this webinar. So, couple of things we wanted to mention is, like, we deal with a lot of customers and they had to spend a lot of time in completing this RFP and RFQ requirements. That takes up their valuable time. Instead, if you have this ISO certification, instead of filling out all these questionnaires, you might be able to provide just the third-party report and get away with not filling out by not filling out all those vendor assessment questionnaires and whatnot, right? And also, I think, like, I covered this in the very beginning. So based on some of the different standards, frameworks, and other details that are published so far in the industry, I think, like, ISO 27001 probably is the most comprehensive standard that covers as I say, nuts to soup, and everything. It covers starting in terms of onboarding staff, all the way to how would you go about even recover an environment and whatnot if there is any kind of disaster. So it helps you to think through the different risk scenarios and have controls that makes more sense for your environment, and then be able to demonstrate that. All the good thing is it's all done by an independent third party, which kind of adds more value to what you are trying to accomplish, right?
If I may, just on the last slide for the people
sure.
in Europe, pretty important to mention. We have all known the impact of GDPR. For some of those that know the Directive on Security of Networks and Information Systems, or the NIST guideline, there's a new version coming up. So it talks about operators of essential services that need to be NIST compliant. Now it's usually your transport sector, so really banking sector, stuff like that. But hospitals and stuff like that could come into view as well for this. So it's going to be translated into national law probably by 2025. We have to be ready. So it's being put into law as we speak. We don't know when it will be ready here in Belgium, but keep an eye out for that, because it explicitly mentions ISO 27001 as a requirement to have. And there's also the Digital Operations Resilience Act coming up, also from a European directive. It's aimed at the financial sector mainly, but you can feel that the legislative people are also looking into leveraging ISO 27001, making it a requirement, something that you will need to obtain by law to be in standing order. So take that into account as well, please.
Oh, good. Yeah, great comments. Good. Yeah, definitely. I think, like, before they mandate, you might as well start planning. Right. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to, just in the interest of time, I'm going to quickly go over some of these slides. So obviously, as I mentioned, so we use the DBA's platform to collect, document, and report on all your ISO compliance standards and whatnot. So that kind of gives you pretty good understanding of where we are with respect to some of these things, and what are what are the things that you need to be doing and things. So it helps us to be more collaborative as part of our audit and implementation. So here are like some of the useful references that you could use. All of them are hyperlinks. You could click on it, and some of these blogs are very popular. What is the what is the deal with all this different standard framework? Because whenever you talk to folks, they talk about NIST standards, SOC 2, and other standards. So it kind of gives you a good overview, and then also talks about the examination and certifications and whatnot. So definitely do spend some time in terms of the references that are provided here. If you have more questions, more follow-up things that you want to do, feel free to reach out to us. In terms of the other questions, what's the cost of the 27001 certification? So it definitely depends on the number of staff, sites. These there are, like as I said, there are certain guidelines provided by ISO for us to spend time and then do the control reviews and certification. So that is something we need to follow. And then there are of course other factors like suppliers and your other outsourcing activities and stuff. But generally, just to give you a ballpark, it would somewhere around like 15,000 euro is what it starts from, and then it could run to depending on the number of days and the activities that are involved, it could really be higher as well, right? For the implementation, maybe do you want to talk about that here for the implementation?
Yeah, also dependent, like mentioned a couple of times, how much work are you planning to do yourself, which is of course an internal cost that you have to factor in. But what we usually see is for organizations, our usual implementation projects, they start at 25K mark, and that's roughly translates into 25 to 30 days of consultancy activities from us. But it also, like you said, it depends on the size of the organization, the complexity of the organization, and it really depends on that to give you an exact figure. But this is something that you have to take into account, that it starts from about 25K.
Gotcha. Okay. Is ISO 27001 certificate difficult? I think like the answer to that is it depends on where you are with your controls implementation and what other certifications and things you have. Like as Gert mentioned, some of you might have gone through GDPR. So GDPR has got a lot of overlap with ISO 27001. So it depends on what is that you have in place, what is that you don't have. From certification perspective, though, it may not make a lot of difference in terms of the cost and stuff. But from the implementation perspective, it might vary. Yeah. Anything you want to add, Gert, for the earlier one?
No. I just can only speak from my area of the world, because I know that in North America, SOC 2 is also a very popular alternative for the ISO certificate. But here in Europe, ISO is really the go-to we see in the market.
Yeah. So as far as the third-party certification per se, based on our experience, there are hardly a few certification options available in the security space. ISO 27001 is probably the topmost, right? And then, as Gert mentioned, SOC 2 examination or attestation is also equally popular here in the US. And other than that, like we are not aware of many certification. A lot of the other requirements are like mostly like the NIST and other things. There are no certification per se that's available. And for HIPAA and GDPR, again, it is probably just self-attestation or doing a third-party assessment. That would not be any certification. Yeah, is it worth it? But again, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. As I mentioned earlier, like it is becoming a big requirement in a lot of the RFPs and RFQs. Companies want to know like whether customer has taken, their vendors have taken security seriously, whether they have gone through any certification process, and whatnots, right? And I think Gert also talked about some of the mandate that are coming in from some of the countries in the Europe, where it's going to be kind of mandatory for you guys to have the certification going forward. Anything else, Gert, you want to add?
Well, yeah, just based on what I get to deal with on a day-to-day basis as a company that's offering managed services, it's becoming more and more of a requirement for our customers as well. They put it in their RFPs now that we need to be compliant. So the market is forcing you to do so.
Yeah.
Srini, we have a question that's come in live. I thought we should, since it links in with who needs the certification. So
Sure.
the question is, what do you recommend for a small physician practice?
What do you recommend for a small?
Do they need an ISO certification? And it links to this question about who really needs an
Sure,
ISO
absolutely.
certification.
So it depends on I know like we have international audience in the call. So it depends on where the clinic is situated. Let's say if it is situated in the US, they need to comply with HIPAA and the high-tech requirements. And if it is in Canada, again, you have separate requirements. And in Europe, it is mostly going to be the PII related compliance that they need to do. But with respect to ISO certification for the clinic, yes, definitely they could demonstrate their the security standards by implementing the ISO 27001. It definitely doesn't hurt them. Yeah, and in terms of the who needs ISO 27001 certification, I think like this is probably the beauty of this standard. This could be applied across the board, across industries, and I think like there is no specific industry that needs to adopt the standard. Based on our experience, I think like this could be all across the board, whether they are in the US or Europe or like any location wise, it doesn't matter. And then like even industry wise, if they are going to have ISO. So we worked with the product companies who wants to get ISO 27001 certification. We worked with the MSPs, and we worked with a lot of other service companies who want to get 27001 certification, and manufacturing, logistics, and everybody like they like this certification. Yeah, Gert, do you want to add anything to that?
I always, it's maybe a bit of a cliche, but I compare it to a driver's license. We all drive cars. We all obtained our license at one point or another. You can kind of compare that with your certification, but that doesn't necessarily make you a good driver. So as we experience daily on the road, what I mean by this is don't treat this ISO certification as just something that you need to get, or for the sake of the piece of paper or the digital copy that you get. No, treat this as an opportunity to look at your internal processes, look at the way that you train people, look at the way you apply technology, assess your risk. It's really an opportunity to truly become more secure as a company. So don't do it for the sake of the certification, but do it for the sake of your customers, your patients, your whatever. Just try and look at it from that perspective.
Absolutely, I think very well said, Good, right? So I know we ran over a little bit, so really sorry about that, but hopefully we've covered some of the things that you're looking for as you join this webinar. And here is our contact information. Feel free to reach out to us via any of the social media channels or the contact information that are provided here. So with that, Thank you, Gert, for sharing your experience and your expertise in this webinar, and thank you all for joining today's webinar.
Thank you, Srini. We look forward to seeing everyone in our next webinar. Have a wonderful week ahead. Thank you, Gert.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.